This video was brought to you by Skillshare. Today, China struggles with deflation, leaders gather for NATO's 75th anniversary summit, and West Africa risks de-integration. From TLDR News, this is your daily briefing for Wednesday the 10th of July, 2024. New consumer price data has shown that China's deflationary pressures continue to impede the country's economic recovery. That's because the consumer price index rose just 0.2% from a year ago, according to the National Bureau of Statistics on Wednesday. That's even lower than the 0.3% rise in May, and less than the forecast of 0.4% growth by a Bloomberg poll of analysts. Meanwhile, the producer price index declined 0.8% last month year on year, which, to be fair, is an improvement from the 1.4% contraction in May. The factory gate price gauge has gained strength over the past 3 months and was in line with analysts' forecasts, but the data has underscored concerns about poor consumer spending in the world's second largest economy. The main concern here, though, is deflation, which is when consumer and asset prices decrease over time and purchasing power increases. The mirror image of inflation, deflation, is essentially when you can buy more goods and services tomorrow with the same amount you have today. While this might sound like a good thing, deflation can signal an impending recession, because when people feel like prices are heading down, they delay spending in the hopes that they can buy things for cheaper at a later date. This lower spending then creates a negative feedback loop, as less spending means less income for producers, which can generate high unemployment, leading to even lower prices and even less spending. While at the start of the year, analysts predicted that China would have to deal with deflationary pressures for at least the first 6 months, the chief economist for a leading Chinese hedge fund has now said that the risk of deflation has not faded in China, as domestic demand remains weak. And consumer prices were particularly affected by the falling costs of food. Vegetable prices, for instance, dropped 7.3% year on year during June, while prices of fruit fell by 8.7%, and those of beef tumbled by 13.4%. While the country was able to achieve an official growth goal of around 5% in 2023, repeating a similar performance may be difficult this time round, especially after economists surveyed by Bloomberg forecast consumer prices to increase by only 0.6% this year, a far cry from the 3% official target. Next week, the Chinese Communist Party is set to hold an important economic policy meeting to discuss what can be done about this economic downturn, but the data certainly isn't looking good. There's more on the way, but remember to subscribe and ring the bell for more daily briefing tomorrow. Plus, if you want to support the channel like Michael Antonius, then consider joining the new TLDR membership program for just $1.99. On Tuesday, the 2024 NATO summit began in Washington, D.C., marking 75 years since the alliance's formation. The first day of the 3-day summit focused heavily on Ukraine and defense spending, with European leaders using their speeches to explain to US taxpayers that NATO's burden sharing is worth it. This all came after Russian missile strikes targeted a hospital in Kyiv on Monday, killing dozens of civilians. But that's not where all of the attention has been, because there have also been reports about rising nervousness regarding US President Joe Biden's fitness to lead, following his faltering performance in a TV debate last month. Concerned about Biden's re-election prospects, European delegations have held meetings with Donald Trump's foreign policy associates, and even appealed to Trump directly. Estonia's defense minister used a golf analogy to call out NATO members that fall short of NATO's 2% GDP defense spending target, saying NATO is a club, and when you have club rules, you respect those rules. Trump is a golfer, so when you pay your fee in the golf club, you can play. This is also the first international trip for Britain's new Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who says that he'll use the summit to underline the UK's cast-iron commitment to NATO and unshakable support for Ukraine. Starmer will also call on other members to increase their defence spending, as he launches a major review which sets out plans to spend tens of billions of pounds more on Britain's military. Next up, the West African regional bloc of ECOWAS has warned that the volatile region risks de-integration and a further deterioration in security as three junta-led countries, Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, cement their own alliance with a new pact. These three nations, which form the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES, signed on Saturday a new treaty as a step towards greater integration, turning their back on the near 50-year-old ECOWAS bloc that's been urging them to restore democratic rule. ECOWAS began mainly as an economic grouping, but has evolved into a political and security alliance too. The military regime of Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger had announced back in January their intention to leave ECOWAS in favour of their own new alliance. With this latest step towards that being taken, the head of ECOWAS's commission said that the three countries' withdrawal risks the loss of millions of dollars in funding, political isolation, disruption of freedom of movement, and would be a major blow to security cooperation in a region marred by violent insurgencies. These comments were made at an ECOWAS meeting held at the same time as an Alliance of Sahel States summit, during which Niger's military ruler described ECOWAS as a threat to our states, claiming that it was in the stranglehold of foreign powers. Next up, let's return to the US, where President Biden has seemingly stifled an effort to get him to withdraw from the presidential race, at least for now. Democrats are increasingly concerned that Biden is on course to lose November's presidential election if he's unable to assuage voters' concerns about his age and health. However, after a closed-door meeting of Democratic lawmakers in Washington, described as rough and somber, no critical mass of Democrats emerged seeking Biden's withdrawal, though there was also no wave of enthusiasm for his candidacy either, and the number of lawmakers calling for him to pull out of the race has only gone up. The risk for Democrats here is the more public this struggle gets, the more they undermine the man who's on course to be their candidate. President Biden had written a letter to congressional Democrats ahead of their meetings, stating that despite all the speculation, I am firmly committed to staying in the race, adding that he's the best person to beat Donald Trump and that he was overwhelmingly endorsed by the party's members during the Democratic presidential primary. Separately, in a telephone interview, Biden expressed his frustration with what he called party elites, saying that any of these guys that don't think I should run against me, challenge me at the convention, laying down the gauntlet ahead of the party's mid-August convention, where Biden will officially be made the Democratic presidential nominee. And finally, in some uplifting news, Spain's Lamine Yamal has become the youngest ever player to score a goal at the European Championships, after the 16-year-old scored during Spain's 2-1 semi-final victory over France at the Euros on Tuesday night. Yamal had already broken a record by becoming the youngest ever player to appear at the Euros Championships, so he can now add this goal-scoring record to his collection. Now, Yamal turns 17 on Saturday, but there won't be much time for celebration because he and the Spanish team will then go on to face England or the Netherlands in the tournament's final the very next day. Running a profitable online news brand that gives away free content is a little tricky. So recently we launched an online store where you can purchase copies of our magazine, Too Long. The thing is, setting up an e-commerce business is also pretty tricky. But fortunately, when it comes to websites and e-commerce, Skillshare is there to help, with me taking their very useful course, Shopify Essentials for Web Developers, when setting up the store. That's because Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. That means that Skillshare can help take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, or side hustles to the next level. There's hundreds of career-focused classes. That's courses from how to start a business to maximizing your workflow or digital marketing. The best news is that the first 500 people to use our link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial to Skillshare. So get started today.